Afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be back. This is the third year of the speaker series. It's exciting to see. Every time I come here, I feel like something is changing. What's being broken ground? Like, what's all the change on this side of the lot? Oh, very interesting, very interesting. I love that every time I come here, there's like something new brewing, which is exciting. And it's nice to meet so many new faces. Katie and I were just talking. I think the first year we started, there were 15 folks in this room. And obviously there's way more today. So it's really nice to see how much the organization is growing and truly how much they deeply are committed to offering space for you all to get to know one another and maybe practice some skills along the way, which is hopefully what we get to do today, right? So again, Angie, I use she, her pronouns. I am super invested in higher education, but I love coming into organizations such as this and helping to kind of offer maybe some complementary lens to the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. I often try to start most of my conversations with just a moment of pause because I feel like we rush right into every project after another, right? So I'm just curious, are there any other hikers in this space, people who like to get out, right? We live in Western PA. Hopefully that's true. Anyone know where this spot is? It's in one of our local state parks, yeah.
Can you guess Laurel Highlands?
Oh, it could be in the Laurel Highlands. It certainly looks like it, but no, actually not.
Is it Moraine?
It is not Moraine, but you're getting closer, right? So this is McConnell's Mills. This is the Cleland Rock Trail, and so it's just a really nice lookout. So if you haven't been, I always go to McConnell's Mills and stay by the water because it's so gorgeous, right? All those mossy rocks, but it's really pretty too. The higher up you go, so maybe a nice spot of inspiration for folks.
Actually, love that same spot too.
Oh,
I know I've been there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm going to try to keep it on the fall foliage lens today, right? Most of my slide deck is kind of inspired by this time of year. Nature is always a muse for me and a really nice way to just take a moment and be present, right? You got a gorgeous spot right outside your doors, and so it's a nice way to think even about your lunch break and how you might just get that nice little moment of breathing. So a little bit about where we're headed today. I feel like in order to talk about what we're doing in the next 3 months, right, which is all about emotional intelligence, I think it's really helpful and fair to zoom out a little bit to acknowledge kind of the world in which we are living in today, which is, throwing a few challenges our way. I would love to connect that back to why it might be important to you, because after all, this is just fluff if it doesn't feel relevant or accessible in the ways that we operationalize our day-to-day. I usually try to think about this framework in any wellness workshop that I offer, which is decide it first, why is it important to me, right? So I'm a Simon Sinek fan. I always put the why before the what. So how is this personally relevant? Then we'll give some common language just so we actually have a framework so that we're all talking the same language. And then we'll actually talk about actually, how does this feel realistic, both here at Gateway, but also in your personal lives. So hopefully along the way, I'll share some resources that will help you activate some of these skills or continue to refine, right? I always say this is an iterative process. No matter where we are in life, these are the type of things that we will continue to build upon. Any questions about our agenda today? Okay, great. I didn't have a plan B, so that's good. Okay, so a little bit about acknowledging life. I continue to use VUCA as an acronym to describe a little bit about where we are at. I sometimes feel it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy because every time I say it, I'm like, oh, it's gotten even more volatile and more uncertain and more chaotic. But this was actually a frame that was coined by the US government, the military in 1987, I believe, as they were thinking about the Industrial Revolution and really how so much advances in that time and space were exactly this, right? So volatility stands for the speed of change, right? So such quick, both in industry, in supply chain, in all the ways in which we were delivering our work was pretty volatile. It was uncertain in that it was really hard to predict the future, right? So you might have been able to guess in 5 weeks what would things look like, but in 5 months it was starting to get a little fuzzier. The complexity just means that there's a lot of independent and dependent variables, and you can't always tell how they all connect to one another, which means it's really hard to decipher with clarity exactly what each thing represents and how it influences the greater fold. So I like to think about this now. It's resurfaced a bit with the AI revolution and just the automation that we see all around us, right? So can you raise your hands and think about like one process that has been recently automated here at Gateway, right? That might have been, I mean, we have it all the time at Carnegie Mellon, right? Like we go from like people to paperwork to process, right? Like it's happening very swiftly around us. And so I find that this is a really good model because it does give us like this bigger picture of we're in a constant space of uncertainty, and the body, right, our stress response doesn't love uncertainty, right? We're not actually good. That's not a muscle we flex very often. In fact, I've even been thinking about and planning workshops around that very theme of like, how do we get comfortable with uncertainty? That could be like a whole theme in and of itself, right? Lately, I've been trying to like challenge myself to like go to a restaurant and eat something that I wouldn't normally pick off the menu, or listen to a podcast series that wouldn't normally be on my Spotify list, all in an attempt to kind of fortify this sense of like, I can be okay with a little bit of uncertainty or a little bit of something that feels different, right? So might be helpful for you to think about like, what is VUCA in your own world, right? What is changing really quickly for you? What feels uncertain? What has a lot of complexity attached to it, right? My son just went off to college. It's a really different span of life for me, right? That feels very VUCA to me. Not in a bad way, right? VUCA doesn't automatically mean hard or difficult, but it does mean, right, that there's a little bit of challenge associated to it. So yeah, give your time, give yourself space to think about how this might apply to me. Any questions about VUCA? All right. Does everyone kind of feel this, right? Like this feels pretty relevant in today's day and age. We are certainly seeing it a lot in higher education, right? The very, how we operate, especially as a Research One institution, is very much under challenge right now through a VUCA space. Okay, so why? Why might then emotional intelligence be like a relevant theme for us to discuss, right? So emotional intelligence, EQ, has been around for decades, right? It was coined originally in the 1960s. It became really popular in the 1990s with Daniel Goleman's famous book on emotional intelligence. Really just breaks down to like, how do we better know ourselves, right? How do we manage our own emotions? How do we even acknowledge our emotions? We have lots and lots of emotions. We tend to boil them down to like a very small amount, right? In most surveys, people would say like, I am really good with like noticing 10 emotions. Well, we have like over 97 emotions, right? Like there's a lot of wealth to this space, but how do we acknowledge those? And then how do we understand the emotions of others and then have and create spaces that allow for empathy, for understanding, right? And social interaction in a way that's beneficial to all. So emotional intelligence, right? This is the in this moment, kind of thinking about the why. It might be helpful for you to think about, yeah, like of course I know my emotions, right? But why it might be helpful for us to sit in this space together. So the question I would pose to you is, right, if you had to make a commitment or set an intention about why EQ would be helpful to explore a little bit further, what would that be for you? And I'm not going to ask you to share this, right? I will certainly share my own. I think about this a lot. Obviously, my work centers around this topic, but I have a really intense workload, right? I have lots and lots of things that are coming at me all the time, and if I didn't grow my capacity in EQ, then I would have a really hard time prioritizing what feels most important and maybe even more importantly, how I actually show up and be present for whatever is in front of me, right? I mean, how many times is our mind and our body in two different locations? I tried to get to a place where, right, if I'm being emotionally intelligent, I can be more present more often for both myself and the people around me, which doesn't always mean that I'm going to solve all the problems, but I do feel like I can offer a greater quality of presence to everyone involved. And then the second part is, like, I'm a pretty intuitive, emotional person in general, right? I feel a lot, I care deeply, and being more emotionally intelligent helps me manage those emotions in an effective way, right? Because otherwise, every time I had a student show up in my office crying about something, right, like I would hold all of that emotion with them, right? So it helps me be more sustainable in this work by being compassionate and holding space for that person without taking on all of the hardship of them and the world, right, on top of everything else that I do. So maybe offer yourself some time to think about why it could be valuable to you. And if anyone's brave enough to share, you're welcome to do so. I think about this a lot in my parenting style, right? More emotionally intelligent I am, the better off I am to raise a child, now adult, who can also be thoughtful with their emotions and others' emotions, right? Yeah.
When I play pickup basketball, I get a little like competitive. Sometimes I like outbursts, not like crazy outbursts, but like, yelling at my teammates and things like that. So controlling that a little bit, and just pushing forward and constructive criticism and not putting people down, I guess. So.
Yeah, I love that. I have a colleague who often talks about calling people in, not calling them out, right? She's like, it's way more effective, right? So somebody says something that I don't love, right? Like inviting them to talk more about that so I better understand where they're coming from is a way better ability to engage versus making some assumptions, then making some assumptions, and then that relationship not going very far as a result. So I love that. How many of you are in project teams here at Gateway? Raise your hands. Like everything, right? Everything is project-based. I think it's actually part of your mission. And so even just that, right? Like actually enjoying the people that I'm surrounded by, especially when stress is really high, especially when the demands are piling up, emotional intelligence can be a really positive tool that you can have to kind of make sure that if communication is not where you want it to be, how do you get back to a place, right, that feels more open and honest and trust-building? Okay. So you could keep thinking about your why, right? I invite that throughout the series. I would love to offer a framework that I have found to be really valuable, right? So we can talk about our feelings, but that is really hard, especially in a group this large. So instead, what I thought we could do is actually talk about a framework that I think all of us can relate to, which is this difference between time management and energy management. So I'm unfortunately one of those people who feel like time scarcity is a very real thing, right? There's not enough hours in the day. There's not enough days in the week. In fact, at one point a few weeks ago, I was like, oh man, I wish I just had one more work day this week, like one more work day. And I'm like, wait, what is happening, right? That's not normally how I feel, but I'm down a team member. And so I'm like feeling the push, right, of like being able to accomplish everything. I came upon this literature actually many years ago at this point, and I continue to see it iterate in the research that continues to come out, albeit with different language. And it's one that I continue to come back to because I think it's so powerful and so effective. So the idea here that Jim Lair and Tony Schwartz came up with is that time is this very finite thing, right? We can't change it, we can't modulate it, it is what it is. However, our energy is much more adaptable. Energy is always there, it never goes away, right? Like we're just going to modulate or move it into something else. So what I love about that is that I think, unlike machines, right, which is very kind of time-bound, everything is static, it's linear, the machine is working in the same capacity at the start of the day as it is at the end of the day. Humans, on the other hand, go through these oscillation periods, right? You know when your high energy moments are throughout the day. You also probably know when your low energy moments are. Having the ability to shift that to be more thoughtful and cognizant of like, where is my energy showing up, can be a more effective way of us managing not only our emotions, but the ways in which we are engaging whatever's in front of us. And so what they deposited as the hypothesis after they interviewed thousands and thousands of leaders from a whole bunch of different disciplines is that what they thought was kind of the central heart of this is that the more intense we create of a lifestyle, right, whether that's through active work, whether that's through active play, all of our other commitments, personal and professional, the greater the need for rest, renewal, and reflection. Not that it has to be like this balanced scale, right, where we have 8 hours on and 8 hours off, but rather that we move through these oscillating moments throughout our day in a more intentional fashion. And what I love about that is that all of the research kind of cues back up like why that would be helpful for sustainable work, right? So we can go all out, and some of us have, right? We have a really big deadline, we're just going to push ourselves to the brink, but I would argue that is not something we can do again and again and again without having the ability to oscillate. And so I just would love for us to kind of talk about that today as like a way that we can operationalize this work. Does anyone have any questions about that particular hypothesis? Okay. So just a little bit of some definitions so we all know what we are working with, right? So when I say energy, because energy, like you're like, what are we talking about? I just simply mean capacity, right? If we have the capacity to do things, the more we can think of our energy as something that we can fill or deplete, right? So the more we can think about how our energy shifts throughout the day. And I would argue we probably have 4 main sources of energy. We often think about our physical energy because it's, it's what our smartwatches tell us, right? It's like how hydrated are we? How much sleep have we received? How physically well do we feel at any given time? How many steps have we taken, right? We kind of know our physical energy. How many of us actually process our emotional energy, right? So if physical energy is the quantity of our energy, I would argue that emotional energy is the quality, right? So this is, when I wake up in the morning, what's my overall affect? As I move through my day, what's my inner narrator telling me, right? Am I beating myself up after every single decision, after every single thing that comes out of my mouth? Or am I giving myself some grace, some self-compassion? Am I using a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, right? Like these are all things we can kind of think about when we think about our emotional energy. The third is our focus of energy, which I would argue is kind of the superpower of this day and age, right? When everything is vying for our attention, having the ability to just sit down and focus on one thing will give you a kind of a sense of your focus, right? When I know, if I open up my computer and I'm trying to read through a document or an article and I just keep scanning the same paragraph again and again and again without actually consuming it, right, digesting it, understanding what it's telling me, I know my focus is off, right? I know that that is like a signal that I need to do something else because I'm now at a space of cognitive overload, right? I know that usually happens at like the 1 o'clock mark when especially if I have rushed through my lunch break and I didn't really, I'm like eating over my laptop while I'm still trying to answer emails. So again, great example of if I have 45 minutes for lunch, right, I can do that and try to pow all this stuff into that space, right, micro or multitask, to-dos and eating and trying to get everything done. Or I can just take a 45-minute break. Same exact time that I've given myself, very different energy that I land into my afternoon, right? So thinking about that to support both our physical, our emotional, our mental can be a really nice way to kind of think about the ways we modulate. The last, I think, actually doesn't get enough credit, but it's one that each of us has to reconcile, which is our spiritual energy. And when I say spiritual energy, I simply mean what motivation or connection do we have with the day-to-day things that we do, right? How much does it live into our values? How much does it feel like it's important to us, right? I mean, we've all been in spaces where it kind of feels like we're the hamster on the wheel, right? It's just like another day. My mom used to have the saying, like, another day, another dollar, right? Like, that kind of feels like we have pretty low spiritual energy. But if I can move through my day thinking, like, actually, this conversation matters, or this is really important to me, or this is a project that I value, or I have a lot of pride in, right? My spiritual energy, that force of my energy, goes up. And when I start to plateau, right, when I start to feel like none of my work is like feeling any different than it did 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 years ago, it's when I need to have a conversation with my supervisor to say, like, I need to be able to switch things up. I need to be able to try something new or to dip my toe into something that feels exciting to help me balance that motivation, right? Okay, any questions about these three forces? All right, so this is where we get to play. So on your desk, you have a sheet. Do you mind if I just pull this up? You have this kind of list, this not so pretty, but organized list. So what I would love for you to do, let me set this up a little bit. So this exercise is actually adapted by the Design Your Life Lab at Stanford. It's one of the most popular courses Stanford has offered, right? It's all about designing a life that makes sense to you. And this is called an energy mapping worksheet. And so what Dan Evans and Bill Burnett did, the original founders of the Design Your Life, is they just asked people to kind of think about, like, walk me through your day. And if a day feels like not enough, then walk me through your week, right? Identify 10 to 12 things that show up for you on a regular basis, right? So maybe start from the start of your day to the end of your day, or the start of the week to the end of the week, and notice what tasks or things, activities, show up for you. So mine might look like I get up and I walk my dogs, or I meditate, right? Like, I have some things that are mine to choose, and then I take a commute to work every day, and then I read a bunch of emails, and I do a few workshops, right? I have a bunch of meetings, I have errands, right? So think about what yours would look like. Take 5 to 7 minutes just to list what your activities might be, both things that you get to choose as well as things that choose you. Okay. We'll continue to add activities, right? You can put 30 activities if you'd like, right? Like, really show up for, like, what is in my life right now, right? What's coming at me, and what am I intentionally leaning into? What you're going to do now is map those, right? So you can imagine the line on the bottom half of your sheet. Assume that horizontal axis is net neutral, right? Meaning, so from a capacity perspective, that is, if it landed right on the line, is neither taking energy from you or giving you energy. And again, remember those 4 sources, right? I argue, and I'll share a little bit of mine, right? It's never as black and white as like all energy inducing or all energy draining, right? And keep in mind, drain does not necessarily mean mad. It just means that it is consuming from you, right? Meaning, like, if I teach a really hard class, or it's a brand new class and it's new content, right, that's taking a lot of my capacity to make sure that that's moving in the right direction. But I'm still gaining some things from that too, right? Like, I actually love to teach. I love being in front of folks. And so thinking about it from that nuanced lens, I think, can be really helpful. So start negotiating, right? Start visualizing, like, where is your energy throughout the day? I do find it helpful to, like, move from morning to night, because then you can actually visualize, like, oh, this is an interesting observation I have about where my energy is landing throughout my day or throughout my week. So here is where I invite you to be and utilize, maybe practice a little bit of your emotional energy, right? Which is, one, just be kind of compassionate towards yourself, especially if you start to see things on your page, you're like, oh, this feels really interesting, or oh, this isn't where I want it to be. We have a tendency as humans to like kind of go after like being deficit, model framework more often than not, right? We're like, oh, this doesn't feel as where I want it. So I just ask that like you be kind to yourself as you see the shifts in your energy, and to begin to notice, right? Like mindfulness in and of itself is this practice of simply observing what is without trying to change it or shift it or make it any other way. So in this moment, I'm just asking you to be present for your graph. What do you notice? What do you observe? Yeah.
There's more draining activities probably than gaining activities.
Yeah. Anything in particular that you notice about the draining activities?
They're not like too draining. They're just like a few of them sprinkled throughout the kind of oscillates back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you notice a shift in like what is in your control versus what is like assigned to you, so to speak?
Work has to happen. It's kind of a draining thing too. But take breaks and that kind of that's the little control piece. Kind of take a little break, walk around, stretch your mind a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're getting into a lot of the intervention work that I think we're gonna talk about, which is like, if we start to see that like my entire day is like drain, right? Like, what are some of the micro habits we can install in between some of those activities that can give us a little bit of the oscillation that we seek, right? I mean, my entire job is about helping people think about like the micro habits that they would like to have and then continue to expand and build upon, right? To build a foundation that they can come back to again and again and again to feel more grounded and stable in whatever chaos is then going on around them, right? I love, it's an unknown quote, but like this idea that like peace does not mean that our inbox is down to zero or that there is zero chaos around us. It simply means that we have a calmness inside, right, within, that allows us to manage whatever is without. So what other observations?
I noticed that none of the ones on my graph are just like either net positive or net negative.
Mm-hmm.
Like they all have a bit of both, and even if like it's the ones that like I really enjoy, like there's always gonna be like a draining aspect. Like, oh, I love my pottery class, but it's late at night, and when I come home, I'm really tired. That's like goes into like energy draining, but like it's a bit of both.
Yeah. I love that. So this idea that like nothing is as stoic as sometimes we make it out to be, right? Including work, including projects that are really hard. They are all pretty complex in the ways in which we engage. What I especially liked about that is like that's what gets us out of bed, right? Like you're not doing a pottery class because somebody told you to do it. You're doing it because it's meaningful to you, which does require like effort, right? And so I think it allows us to reframe sometimes the narrative we have around what is stressful and why it's important that we have stress in our lives, right? Like we can make stress the enemy, but stress is a natural state of the human experience. If we didn't have any stress, I would actually argue we would have a different type of stress, right? And in fact, research even shows like people who win millions and millions of dollars, quite frankly, would say that it is one of the most stressful experiences that they have ever encountered, right? Because it is so much shift in the ways in which they operate. So we can always pretend that the grass is greener when everything is nice and calm, but I would state, and I think you beautifully shared, right? It's way more nuanced than that, right? We can take a vacation, but I think the goal is to be in a life that feels like it is malleable enough and flexible enough and adaptable enough that we can manage whatever the day-to-day is, whether we are going to work or not. Any other observations? Why don't we do like a share at your tables? That feels a little bit more helpful, right? So talk about at least one thing that came up for you and get to know the people who are at your table. All right, raise your hand if someone at your table has not gone. Anyone need more time? Does everyone have time to? Okay, awesome. So let's chat about some of the things that you heard. I'm sure there were some like connection points, right? Like where things were aligned or not, right? I think we learn a lot from the collective wisdom in the room. Curious if any insights came up for you all. Yeah.
Sorry. Dogs and children seem to have either big ups or big downs depending on the day.
Yes, because they are so present, right? Yeah, I mean, I think toddlers are such a great example of like, my energy is up and you know that it's up, and my energy is down and you know it's down, right? Like they're really transparent about where their emotions are, even if they can't decipher exactly what emotion they are feeling. So I love that.
And it also takes like the amount of energy it requires of us is very dependent on them, right?
Yes.
How's getting dressed gonna go? Is it gonna take a lot of my energy today or a little bit of my energy?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I had this, obviously my son is older now, but I would get to this place where I had to remind myself of like, I can scream up the stairs, right? Or I can like try to match that energy or that fury, or I can actually go and sit down beside him and have a conversation. Very different outcome between those two things. So if I had the wherewithal to just take a moment before I reacted to respond, then we will always get faster to wherever we needed to go, right? But that takes a little bit of emotional intelligence on my part not to kind of match, right? And we do this all the time with each other as well, right? How many times do we go into meetings and you can just feel the energy in the room, right? It's pretty palpable. We can match that, or we can be a model of like, how do we take that down a little bit, right? In order to better understand where we need to go. So, beautiful example. Any other insights?
There's always a trade-off.
Always a trade-off, yes. Yeah, I love this idea that our time, and I would argue our energy, is the most luxury item we own. And if we think about it from that, right, now I can make some decisions about who gets my energy, right? Does social media get to suck me in for 3 hours every night, right? Because that's where, and if you love social media, so do I, right? That's not, and we can begin to do some more discernment about, in this moment, what do I actually need, right? We often talk about this like acronym HALT. I used to do this all the time when I worked with school kids. It actually comes from addiction spaces and circles, which is, am I hungry/thirsty? Am I angry, meaning am I stressed about something, right? And I can feel that. Am I lonely, meaning like I just am missing a connection point, or am I tired? And if I can answer those first 4 questions, then maybe I can get actually to the root of what's going on before I make an impulsive decision about how I'm reacting, right? So all of this can be ways that we can better manage our emotions, right? Better self-regulate. So one of the things that I love to work on is like simply being present for our energy, right? Like having some ways that we can introduce new skills or tactics to show up for what is needed from us most. So what I would love for you to continue to do is spend some time with your energy map. And if you're feeling like there are some dips where you would like to have some greater oscillation, is to first start off to think about like, well, what about an energy spike could be helpful here? Is that a physical energy spike, right? So like my 2 p.m. is a great example of like my physical energy is just low at 2 p.m., right? Like I'm tired, it's starting to go towards the latter half of my day. So that to me is something where I need to like get up and move, right? But maybe it's a mental, right? It's a focus energy thing for you. And so maybe it's about like closing your laptop for a second and talking to a colleague, or using that to do a Teams meeting, right? Something that will get you some more creative juices, right? So thinking about it from those different sources of energy can be one way that you infuse or add something, right? Like a micro hit that feels helpful for the particular energy that you need. Another example I love to use is figuring out what boundaries I need in any given day and then making peace with those boundaries, right? Because we can set boundaries all the time. But then how do we feel about them, right? If they make us feel guilty because we've now set this boundary, that's a whole nother story. So my mornings are really great. I often say, for those of us, we are creatures of habit, right? That's a word or a phrase that exists for a reason. We are all creatures of habit, whether we realize it or not. Our mornings and our evenings are really more in our locus of control, maybe short of having a newborn. And so thinking about that can offer us the start of identifying boundaries that feel really helpful to support our energy, right? So my partner, even my dogs know that the first thing in the morning for me is quiet. It's not picking up my phone to check emails. It's not even rushing to make coffee. It is literally sitting and just being quiet. Dogs don't get their walk before I get my quiet time, right? And so that is a boundary that I've created that then everything else falls into place, right? Once I've given myself that boundary. But thinking about other boundaries we can put into play. So I mentioned before my lunch break, right? My lunch break, not always, right? I can renegotiate boundaries when I need to, but my lunch break is my lunch break. I don't try to schedule meetings over my lunch break. I don't even really love to chat with anyone over my lunch break. That's my time in nature, right? I go often on a walk. And so each of you are gonna have different boundaries that you would like to set. Our dinners are device-free dinners, right? That's a boundary our family has created to be more present for each other. So maybe think about boundaries you have in the workplace and at home that support you feeling like you can kind of oscillate in ways that feel helpful. Second intervention that I love talking about is from a Viktor Frankl quote. That's quite literally my favorite quote of all time, which is this idea that between stimulus and response there is space, and in that space we get to choose our response, and in that response lies our growth and our freedom. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychologist by trade. And so what I love about that is being a pause, right? Creating pause can be a boundary in and of itself, right? I get an email in and I immediately have a reaction to that email, right? Did I not just tell them this 3 other times in 3 other email threads, right? Or it's a big ask that's coming in when my plate is already overflowing. I can immediately respond to that, right? React to that email. Or I can pause, I can take a breath, and then I can choose how I respond, which is simply no, yes, or negotiate, right? I'm far better equipped to negotiate when I've given myself the ability to take a moment to think about all of the things, zoom out a bit before I zoom into that particular task. So think about for you, what are some ways, as you look at your sheet, right? What are some ways that I can introduce a pause to my day? And then the third one is one that you're already talking about, right? Which is these small rituals that recenter you throughout the day or don't recenter you, right? So if you, as I often do, right, my muscle memory is when I'm bored, when I'm stressed, when I'm tired, it just simply glides my fingers towards my phone, right, as a nice little distraction. I absolutely can do that, and I can also think about what are some other ways or other rituals that I can do that would help me take my mind to a place that feels more helpful, right? So think about the small rituals that recenter you throughout the day. Jason, in this company, shared one, I feel like the first time we were having this, right, which is Jason would say, between each meeting, I take a physiological sigh, right? Really, it's just breath work, but it's this idea of taking a really big inhale. You can do it all with me. Take a nice big inhale. Now fill another inhale. Now a full exhale. Try it again. Inhale. Another big inhale. Now full exhale, right? Jason shares that he does that between each meeting. It's just a small 15-second window for him to recenter before he goes into the next one. That's actually research done through the Huberman Lab at Stanford as well. And so it's this idea that each of us has lots of capacity in us to kind of reshift and reframe and remodulate anytime it feels helpful to do so. Any questions as we move through what boundaries look like? what growing space looks like, adding pause to your day. Yeah.
Not a question, but just
Mhm. Yeah.
how you say it? I just listened to him the other day, and he said that 90 minutes is like your maximum attention, whatever you call it.
Yep.
Take a break, do something, and then do your next 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's great. So that is true. The research does share that 90 minutes is kind of top capacity, and I would argue that is for people who have really flexed that muscle to kind of really zone in for 90. Most folks are actually closer to 45 minutes. Where like by the time 45 minutes hits, you're kind of, I'm sure you're at that point closer with me, right? You're like, so my energy is starting to wane from this conversation, right? Totally natural. So to be able to do 45, like you know your time, right? Is it an hour? Is it 45 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Thinking about how you then frame your most critical work throughout the day can be really helpful. So if I know my energy is highest in my morning, I'm going to try to pile my most complex thinking into my morning hours because I know that's where my personal energy feels most satisfied, right? And as it gets closer to like 3 to 7 p.m., right, I'm gonna do more social activities because that is energy building to me, right? And takes a little bit less of my energy. It's like giving. So thinking about how do we modulate even the tasks that are on our to-do list can be a way that we support ourselves. Any other comments? Right, so this is work that I continue to ask and invite you to do. In our last 5 minutes, I just want you to have some table talk, right? Because this is not only about building your own sphere of understanding, but really like how do you make Gateway a better place, right? How do you collectively work to support an environment that feels energy-giving, life-giving, more so than draining, right? So these are some prompts that I have for you, but feel free to add some of your own ideas. And again, talk at your tables. Thank you for continuing to brainstorm. I know what I love about Gateway, and I say this in all seriousness, this is a company that really values the culture, right? Like really wants people who work here to love working at Gateway. And I can't say that about every organization that I work with, right? Sometimes they just want to like check the box and say that they've done it, but I think Gateway time and time again shares with me how much they make sure that you have a voice in like what does this ecosystem look like, right? I heard a lot of really great examples. We were talking about the commute at this table. I also find that the commute is one of those interesting, right? Like I can either hate this 1 hour commute that I do every day, or I can turn it into something that is of value, right? I can be a podcast junkie or an audiobook lover, right? Making sure that when we see things that are really draining our energy, that we have the ability to reframe, like how do I want to show up for this, right? If I have to do it anyways, how do I come to a place where I can make a little more peace with this particular part of my day, right? So I continue to invite you to do that throughout the next few weeks between now and when I see you next. I would love to hear some of your examples, so please come and talk to me. Like this is kind of my jam. I love hearing about how people are operationalizing this. I invite you to, when surveys go out or you get to talk about like, well, what do you want to do for Gateway, right? Like, what are all the fun social activities? Like, think about what works for you, right? Not everyone loves a happy hour. I love that you have a diversity of activities, but if there is something that is not on the list that you think would be really helpful for this community, then work with the folks that can kind of add that flavor or that richness to what life looks like here at Gateway, right? That's really the only way that we grow and make organizations stronger. So thank you for your time today. I look forward to seeing you in November and enjoy your afternoon. Hopefully you get some energy gains.